Hello, friends. Time for another episode of Commentary. Today, I get to talk about one of my favorite topics because it so influenced our culture 100 years ago. And I'm talking about World War One. And who doesn't like to talk about World War One, right? You may think this is going to be a dull history lesson, but trust me, this era changed our culture and not for the good. So let's set the stage. Woodrow Wilson was president, and he had a problem with the upcoming election because he ran on a platform that said he'll keep us out of the war. This was the war in Europe. But of course, behind the scenes, other things were taking place. The Europeans wanted the help of the United States, but the United States was still largely seen at that time as the colonies. And so Wilson knew that he had to get the United States involved in the war. And so he created a group known as the Creel Committee. The Creel Committee's job was to sell the world on the United States, and that was the very first organized propaganda program, and it was created here in the United States, and they did a great job. And in fact, George Creel, his book describes how they did it. And it's fascinating to read this book because you will see things that are still taking place today in the world. And remember, this is an organization whose mission was to make the United States seem bigger and better than it was in the eyes of the world. So the action and the work of the Creel Committee isn't the real story here. It's like Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story is much more sinister. And that's because of the makeup of the Creel Committee. There were two guys in particular that are worth mentioning, even though everybody on that committee had certainly was an influential member of the culture. But Walter Lippmann was a newspaper man, and he was a prolific writer at the time too, and he bought completely into the ideas of a guy, one of the most important figures in American history, a guy named Edward Bernays. Mr. Bernays is known as the father of public relations. Public relations meaning is just a fancy word for propaganda. And in fact, Bernays wrote the book, Propaganda. This book was found in the library of, in Goebbels' library in Nazi Germany. He was the minister of propaganda for that sinister nation. So propaganda, it really is a dirty word, but in Bernays' mind, it was not. Edward Bernays was a nephew of Sigmund Freud. And so he used psychology in the selling of ideas and therefore created this whole genre that we know lovingly today as public relations. Because public relations really is a sales job. And so the Creel Committee, for example, they were a public relations wing of the U.S. government, just as Hasbara is the propaganda wing of the Zionists in Israel. So an office of propaganda has only one mission, and that is to sell the ideas of the people who are running things. And Bernays was absolutely brilliant. There's no doubting that. Excuse me, his first client was the American Tobacco Company. And so he used psychology to sell cigarettes to the American public. And the way he did it was absolutely fascinating. He put cigarettes in the mouths of suffragette marchers and called them torches of freedom. And the reason he did that was he knew that the press would photograph these women smoking as they were marching. And that alone, he reasoned, would increase the sales of tobacco. And he was right. Tobacco, he made a fortune for the elite people who ran the American Tobacco Company. And he went on. So he was all about manipulating the masses. And there are some, excuse me, some fabulous quotes relating to this whole thing. Let me see if I can find them here. Here is Edward Bernays in all of his glory. A false ideal of democracy can only lead to disillusionment and to meddlesome tyranny. If democracy cannot direct affairs, then a philosophy which expects it to direct them will encourage the people to attempt the impossible, and they will fail. The public must be put in its place so that it may exercise its own powers, but no less and perhaps even more so that each of us may live free of the trampling and the roar of a bewildered herd. So that gives you a little idea of what he thought about everyday people and why there needed to be an elite group running everything. And this is the way that the U.S. has evolved over the last 100 years. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of. You know, this is the thinking of people like Edward Bernays, and even worse, the father of professional journalism, Walter Lippmann. And let me be very, very clear here. The idea of creating a sterile environment in which to sell advertising was Lippmann's brainchild. And therefore, he proposed the concept of objectivity. That objectivity in the press made the press professional, and that was just fine because the professional people needed to lead everybody else, needed to be in on the ground floor of ideas and concepts. But objectivity's most important aspect is that it creates this clean environment in which to sell messages. And so the selling of messages works hand in hand with Edward Bernays' ability to manipulate people, because after all, he needed a platform in which to do that. So fast forward all of this to today, and you can see the quandary that journalism is in, because objectivity, ladies and gentlemen, is bullshit. There is no such thing. We are human beings. We are flawed. We can't possibly be objective in any meaningful way. Therefore, there's a brilliant guy, one of the authors of the Clue Train Manifesto, and we'll talk about that some other time. But David Weinberger says that transparency today is the new objectivity, and that is absolutely true. So journalists are still on this journey of trying to figure this out because, after all, you have to remember that newspapers created themselves for the web in their own image, which was, in all honesty, dumber than a bucket of hair. So journalism is struggling right now because nobody trusts anybody. And why not? Because we've been lied to for so long. We've been manipulated by this sterile environment, and we are bombarded today with advertising messages of all sort that flow along that sterile environment, or allegedly sterile environment. And so you can see how we've lost our way in terms of the people being able to have a voice in government. So, as I've said before in earlier episodes, the internet will make possible government of the people, by the people, and for the people, much to the chagrin of people like Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann, who, during the First World War, played a major role in shifting everything in Western civilization. Of course, I could be wrong. After all, I'm just a commentary.